So hi and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled Feminist Writings, where we'll begin with a new text today, Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. Now, it's one of the very, it's an interesting poem because initially it was taught as a fairy tale, as a children's fiction, then it was read as some kind of a moral fable, but then increasingly with the advent of feminism and with the, the whole idea, the whole rise of the feminist literature, scholarship, Goblin Market has been, has been read as a very serious poem about female agency, consumption, especially in relation to consumerism, especially in relation to mercantile invasion, or the whole idea of male merchants and how does a female body negotiate with that kind of a mercantile, male mercantile space. So it's a poem where lots of ideas of commodification, consumption go hand in hand, and it's very interesting to read it through certain markers such as Marxism and Freudian psychoanalysis, because the sexual imagery in the poem is very, very evident, it's foregrounded. The whole idea of getting sexually consumed by the fruit from the Goblin Market, which is obviously very metaphorical and symbolic in quality. So it could be read, like I said, it could be read as a poem about warning, a poem about virtue mocking, a poem about moral fable, a poem about sexual consumption, a poem about female agency, etc. So it offers a series of readings. It's one of those very complex works of literature which open up to several readings, sometimes different readings, but simultaneously co-inhabiting the hermeneutic plane. Now, what we'll do in this session today, we're going to read an essay on the Goblin Market by someone called Dina Rowe. So this is from the British Library website, where it's a very helpful introduction to the poem in terms of what the poem does thematically, in terms of the formal techniques of the poem, and how it offers new kinds of reading to feminist scholarship today. Now, I'm just going to read out the essay, which contains a very helpful summary, and then we'll talk about how that opens up to other possible readings, and then of course we'll move into the poem and read certain selected sections. So the very brief summary of the poem is this, and this should be on your screen now. Set in a fairy tale world and exploring themes of temptation, sacrifice and salvation, Goblin Market tells the story of a fraught encounter between sisters Laura and Lizzie, and evil goblin merchants. So again, the whole idea of these male merchants and how that idea of masculine mercantile space, the bazaar or the market, corrupts the idyllic female space. So one can do a very interesting spatial study of Goblin Market as well. So how the permanence and purity of the idyllic world is destroyed and invaded by the impermanence and temporality of this mercantile male world. When Laura exchanges a lock of her golden hair for the chance to taste a goblin's enchanted fruit forbidden, she deteriorates until she's knocking at death's door. So the whole idea of exchanging or purchasing the goblin's fruit with not currency but a lock of her hair can be read very symbolically as a form of sexualization of consumption, as a form of prostitution perhaps, where selling the lock of a hair becomes sort of, in a way, setting off the sexual self in response, in the hope of getting the commodity from the market. So it becomes a very interesting exchange, the female sexuality being exchanged from the male commodity. And then she deteriorates when Laura exchanges a lock of her golden hair for the touch of the other flavor of the forbidden fruit. She deteriorates existentially, biologically, until she's knocking at death's door. So she's almost dead, and from there she recovers. Her sister Lizzie offers to pay the goblins a silver penny for more of their wares, which she hopes will act as an antidote to Laura's malady. The goblins violently attack Lizzie, smearing the fruits against her mouth in a vain attempt to make her eat. After the goblins are worn out by her resistance, Lizzie returns home, and Laura kisses the juices from her sister's face and is restored. So, even a very superficial summary of the poem would reveal to us the very sexualized nature of metaphors in this poem. So, we can read this as examples of sexual invasion, sexual violence, and it's interesting how the erotic economy in the poem and the financial economy, the capitalist economy in the poem, they are interestingly mapped onto each other in very complex ways. So we see that Lizzie, Laura's sister, after she sees Laura getting more and more consumed by the goblin's fruit, Lizzie goes to the market with a penny, a silver penny, which she pays in order to buy an antidote for Laura's disease. And of course, the fact that she enters the market with a penny means that she has come in with an equal exchange system. So she's not going to sell her sexuality for a commodity. She's just going to pay for it using a penny. And that disturbs the entire male-female binary in the marketplace. That disturbs the entire idea of agency in the marketplace. And we see even a summary. It tells us how Lizzie gets attacked by all the goblin, who attack her violently, and they sort of try to stuff some food into her mouth without her buying it. And then in the end, she keeps resisting that invasion. She keeps resisting that violent attack on her, and then they get worn out by her resistance and disappear. The market disappears, and Lizzie returns home, and Laura kisses the juices from her sister's face and is restored. So again, very sexual. Laura, the two sisters hugging with each other, and then Laura kissing or taking the juices from her sister's mouth, and in the process restoring her back to health and normalcy. Right, so it's a very complex poem, and as you may have said already, it can be read in many different ways, but it becomes a very important and a very powerful text about feminism and feminist literature. It's something that we are studying in this particular course. Okay, now with that very superficial summary, we have some images of the goblin from the Goblin Market. As you can see, the images on the screen. And if you take a look at the images, you find that where Laura and Lizzie, they're obviously very white, pure, beautiful women. The goblins are very beastly in character. They're very beastly in the way they look. So this very anthropocentric quality of the poem gets highlighted, with the goblins being, the evilness of the goblins being equated with the beastliness. Whereas with Laura and Lizzie, the purity or the sense of their principled humanity is equated with their whiteness, the white beauty, the white female beauty that they embody. Okay, so this is obviously Dante Gabriel Rossetti's sketches and page designs, which we see on the screen at the moment. Now, interestingly, as I mentioned, the reception to this poem changed and varied quite dramatically across generations. So when it was first published, it received pretty bad reviews, and then of course it was read as a children's fiction. It was read as a moral fable. It was read as some kind of a cautionary tale of female behavior, the ideal female behavior, etc. But then of course with the with the rise of feminism as a systematic scholarship, this poem has duly has got what it deserves in terms of being a very powerful feminist text, and that's something that we are focusing on this particular session. Now, as you can see, the receptions, as I mentioned, the reviews of the poem very dramatically. So John Ruskin, when he first read the poem, so it says on the screen over here, on first reading of Goblin Market, the eminent Victorian critic John Ruskin declared the Rossetti's irregular measures were the calamity of modern poetry, and that she should exercise herself in the severest commonplace of meter until she can write as a public like. Now, this whole idea of being metrically irregular becomes part of a formal strategy of subversion in Goblin's Market, because there's no metrical consistency in the poem, and that's obviously something that John Ruskin doesn't like about the poem. I mean, he is obviously criticizing this using very heavy metaphors. So he says quite clearly that until Christina Rossetti picks up the skill to be consistent metrically, she should not write for the public. So the public wants metrical clarity, metrical consistency, and until she has clarity and consistency and a use of a meter, she should abstain from writing. And that's something that is obviously a very harsh criticism. But what's interesting to know is that how this poem has subsequently become, it's got a cult following, and now is one of the most respectable poems in feminist literature. It's one of the reasons why we have in this particular course. But the fact is, even metrically, even formally, it is quite subversive in quality. So the formal subversive quality of the poem becomes interesting, quite apart from being thematically subversive. Even the rhythm, metrical rhythm, the metrical clarity, the metrical consistency is deliberately interrupted in the poem over and over again. And this deliberate interruption of metrical consistency is something that we should take into account while looking at a poem as a subversive text. Now, this particular essay tells quite clearly that Ruskin's tenured critique unwittingly identifies one of Goblin Market's greatest strengths, and that is its experimental form. A poem whose compelling narrative is animated by a surprising lyric energy and never conforms to a set rhythm, scheme, a set rhyme scheme, or metrical pattern. For instance, the Goblin Merchant's cries in the opening lines tempt not through lavish verbal description, but through form. So if you look, take a look at the lines which are described over here: apples and quinces, lemons and oranges, plump unpecked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom-down-cheeked peaches, swart-headed mulberries, wild freeborn cranberries, crab apples, dewberries, pineapples, blackberries, apricots, strawberries. So, it comes with hard-hitting words. So it doesn't really have magnificent descriptions of fruits and where they came from, but just gives you almost a bullet list of different commodities or different fruits which are offered in the market. And the hard-hitting quality of the words over here, that gives you a sense of the hard commodity which is available in the market, the hard commodity which is available for consumption. And it's one of the very interesting things in modernist and postmodernist literature, and that is this very interesting correspondence between form and content, because the content over here is one of hard-hitting commodity creation or hard-hitting commodification. And even formally, we have the form which lends itself to the content in a way, instead of a lyric energy, instead of a lyric flavor, which would dilute the crudeness of the commodity, which will dilute the hardcore quality of the commodity. We have hard-hitting words which come at you, which are thrown at you in terms of bullet list of different objects. So the sing-song rhythm of alternating dactylic and trochaic feet mimics the sound of street vendors hawking their wares, while the rhyme scheme eschews traditional corresponding rhyme words in favor of the incantatory reputation of berries and a seductive sibilance that hints at the fruit's dark properties. Now, what this is a very interesting observation, and what this is telling us is essentially that this kind of a description of the poem, where we have the words coming in, driven at us, almost hurled at us, interestingly, and that is very proximate, and that is very, very authentic in terms of representing vendors crying out their wares, vendors selling their wares by screaming out the names. So it's a very common sight in different parts of the world, where vendors, especially vendors who sell the streets, wares in the streets, they walk down lanes, they walk down streets, screaming out what they have, screaming out the commodities they're carrying, in terms of making those more appealing, in terms of making those more sensational in quality. And that sensational quality of the commodity is interesting, because the Goblin Market is essentially a bazaar. And we've had, if you take a look at the different fruits which were described in this passage, you find a lot of these fruits come from different parts of the world, not just from Britain. So you have fruits from Australia, fruits from different parts of Africa, Asia, and the whole bazaar becomes the metonymic creation of the empire in a way. So we have different fruits coming in from different parts of the world, which is symptomatic of the economic, the quality of the economy in Britain, the quality of the bazaar in Britain. So the British bazaar doesn't quite have only British commodities anymore. It's opened up to different commodities in different parts of the world, and that idea of outlandish commodity, the idea of foreign commodity, a foreign body which is inhabiting the bazaar space, makes it exotic as well as slightly dangerous. So this whole idea of a dangerous commodity, a dark commodity, so this particular essay talks about the incantatory reputation of berries and a seductive sibilance that hints at the fruit's dark properties. So there's a menacing quality about these commodities as well that is not quite known. So these commodities can't really be quantified clinically or perfectly. So you have different kinds of fruits coming in, some very exotic, some familiar, some not so familiar. And this is a very interesting space study that one might do in the bazaar, because the bazaar being a space which is an interesting combination of familiarity and unfamiliarity. So what happens with the creation of a bazaar is a process or a drama of defamiliarization, where the space that you know, whether that's a field or an open space, gets converted into stalls, into different kinds of objects, which is not quite known to you. So this whole idea of converting the familiar into the unfamiliar is a process of defamiliarization, and that's something that's dramatically done with the arrival of the bazaar. So the whole poem can be seen as an act of defamiliarization, where known virtues, known movements, known recognitions, known mechanisms of manners, etc., get defamiliarized with the arrival of different objects in different parts of the world. And Against that, we have continuously a sense of the idyllic Britain, an idyllic pastoral Britain, which is obviously feminized, very, very problematically. Okay, so what is essentially a shopping list is transformed by the musical qualities of Rossetti's technique, anticipating Walter Pater's aesthetic creed that all art constantly aspires towards the condition of music. So there's a musicality about these description, which is again the sing-song quality is very, very authentically proximate to the whole idea of merchants going out in the streets and selling the wares by drawing attention to the names and screaming out the names. So drawing on the conventions of a variety of literary genres, including the Gothic, fantasy, biblical, children's literature, and fable, Rossetti creates a disorienting fairy tale atmosphere that is simultaneously seductive and alienating. So this is a very interesting and very potent description of the bazaar, that it can be seductive, it's supposed to seduce you with its commodities, it's supposed to be really draw you with this wares, with its outlandish commodities, but at the same time it could also be alienating because it's not really homely. And I'll come back to the point of homely and unhomely way up, and I'll connect that to the idea of the Freudian unhomely, which is the uncanny. So the bazaar also carries a sense of the uncanny, a sense of something you don't quite know, a sense of something which is outside the home. So the bazaar is literally and geographically outside the home, so you can't have a bazaar inside the home. So the bazaar is a made-up ad hoc public space, and the ad hoc constructed quality of the bazaar is something which is interesting because it's constructed, let's say overnight or over a period of time, temporarily, and then at the end of the bazaar it just goes back, it disappears. The entire ontology of the bazaar is premised on temporality, is premised on ad hoc production or an ad hoc manufacturing of spaces, right? And that's something which we have to keep in mind. So it draws on a series of conventions, including biblical conventions, Gothic conventions, very prominent Gothic quality about Goblin Market, children's literature, fable, moral fable. In the process, it creates a very, I would say, a very postmodern landscape of seductive and alienating metaphors, seductive and alienating attributes. So this constant cohabitation, this constant merge of opposites, this constant entanglement of opposites and tensions gives this poem a sense of metrical energy, a sense of ontological energy. And that mixture of opposites, that mixture of different things, again, is very, very symptomatic of the bazaar space, because the bazaar is a space of mixture, a bazaar is a space of hybridity, so different things coming together and are sold simultaneously in the bazaar, right? So the bazaar becomes not just a space for neat classification, it becomes a space for a production of hybridity, among other things, and that's something which is constantly described in this particular poem. And that hybridity could be seductive, that hybridity could be alienating, that hybridity could also be dangerous because you don't quite know what you're consuming. It's beyond your cognitive radar. It's something which is different. So again, we have a series of illustrations that are accompanied this particular essay, and this is Arthur Rackham's series of illustrations from 1933, interpreting Goblin Market as a tale of a loss of sexual innocence. So again, one may read the poem as a loss of sexual innocence, loss of sexual virginity, as it were. So the two sisters, they represent, at the beginning of the poem, they embody a sense of ideal pure sexuality, which gets corrupted with the arrival of the very male masculinist marketplace, which becomes, as I may have mentioned, a very interesting entanglement of erotic economy and financial economy. So let's take a look at the context of the poem. So what happens in the poem? How does this poem emerge? And it's interesting to draw on certain biographical details while reading the poem, especially in Rossetti's own experiences with prostitutes and rehabilitation of prostitutes is something, a project that she was actively interested in and invested in emotionally, and that obviously lends itself into this particular poem. So Rossetti wrote this poem in 1859 while volunteering at the St. Mary Magdalene Penitentiary for Fallen Women in Highgate, dedicated to the reform and rehabilitation of prostitutes. This Anglo-Catholic institution was remarkable in the period for its conviction that women who had transgressed sexually could be redeemed. So it's an interesting institution that has been named away. Instead of taking a very blunt moral stand on prostitution, it had it offered the possibility of redemption, it offered the possibility of rehabilitation, so you can reintegrate these people into civil society to different kinds of practices, economy practices, moral practices, etc. And as we know, the Rossetti was actively involved in this institution, existentially as well as culturally. So biographers and critics have argued that the themes of temptation, sexual exchange and sisterly redemption in this poem are influenced by the poet's experience working as an associate sister at Highgate. So Rossetti seemed to have drawn on her experience as an associate sister at Highgate, so as an involvement in Highgate prison or Highgate penitentiary, which is obviously an institution for reintegrating these women into the normative folds of society. Now, so again, we have a Morning Post advertisement for this particular institution, and this is from 1860, which should be on the screen. And this poem first was published in Goblin Market and Other Poems, which is a collection, in 1862. Rossetti's skillful and original blend of sound and sense delighted critics and readers alike. Although critical plaudits initially exceeded commercial sales, so its fairy tale cadences led the spectator to declare it a true children's poem. Yet the paper also noted that it has adult themes of temptation, transgression and redemption, but also appealed to a mature readership. So it's a very interesting combination of children's fairy tale themes as well as adult themes such as sexual transgression, sexual corruption and redemption. And that the two themes, the two tensions, the two trends keep mixing in the poem, giving it a very interesting color. The poem was greeted with rapturous applause when the publisher Alexander Macmillan read a manuscript version out loud to a working men's society in Cambridge. Now, interestingly, the working class men who read the poem responded very positively to the poem in Cambridge. Rossetti herself was not writing for children during this period, emphatically declining to contribute to a children's book on the grounds that children are not among my suggestive subjects. Literary admirers included Algernon Charles Swinburne, Alfred Tennyson, and Lewis Carroll, whose Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was partially inspired by the poem. So this is a very, very interesting piece of information that we know that Lewis Carroll, the mathematician who wrote this Alice in Wonderland stories, was profoundly influenced by this poem, apparently. And Rossetti returned the compliment in 1874, writing a book of children's stories entitled Speaking Likenesses, which she hoped would imitate Carroll's success in a booming children's market. So children's fiction market was a booming market, it was a booming industry at that point in time, and both Rossetti and Carroll wanted to tap into the market, the trends in the market as it were. But it's interesting to see how this poem has been read in various ways as children's fiction, moral fable, as well as adult literature. Okay, and we have some letters from the poem which are interesting. Now, let's take a look at some of the interpretations of the poem. So, as I mentioned, there are several interpretations that the poem can open itself onto. Initially received as a moral allegory about the dangers of giving in to temptation, the poem was recast by feminist classic The Mad Woman in the Attic in 1979, one of the canonical books in feminist culture, as a parable of female resistance and solidarity. By contrast, in 1973, Playboy magazine presented the poem as unambiguously pornographic. The text was accompanied by a clinical craft illustration of the goblin attack on Lizzie that left little to the imagination. So we have very different kinds of receptions to the poem. So the Playboy magazine obviously is completely in conformity to the sexualization, the commodification of female sexuality. That described the poem as a pornography poem, and it was very, very explicit in its description of the poem. But a more complex and a more subtle and a more perhaps a more balanced reading of the poem was offered by the feminist classic The Mad Woman in the Attic, which presented the poem as a parable of female resistance, of female solidarity, and a generation of female agency against this attack by male merchants. So we have how this poem gets co-opted but different vehicles, but different institutions, but different forms of readership is an interesting reading in itself. Goblin Market continues to appeal to a popular audience. It has been set to music many times and adapted as a play by Polly Penn and Peggy Harmon in New York in 1986 and Nick Hedges in London in 1995. So it also has lent itself to musicals and musical performances. Now, the 20th century revival of interest in the poem opened the floodgates for feminist, Marxist, Freudian queer theory and new historicist critiques, which variously interpreted the poem as a warning again about the dangers of free market economy, a protest against hazardous practices in the 19th century food adulteration, a Christian tale of sacrifice and salvation, a parable of lesbian empowerment, a fable about anorexia, an expression of incestuous yearning, and a tribute to the delicious oral and oral pleasures of poetry itself. So you find how the poem has opened itself to different kinds of interpretations, and some of these are very interesting because there's one interpretation, there's one reading, one school of scholarship which talks about how the poem becomes a warning about 19th century food adulteration, the whole idea of the market opening up, the economy opening up, and then we bring in food from all parts of the planet in terms of making it sensationalist. What happens to quality control? What happens to controlling the hygiene of the food that they're consuming? So the poem becomes then a moral fable against unhygienic consumption, a moral fable about corrupted consumption, about contaminated consumption. So the whole idea of contamination and loss of hygiene become very important in the poem. And also interestingly, it can also be read, as I suggest, as a fable about anorexia, which is again a very, very current concern among people today, especially people who occupy the public space, the glamour industry, etc. Anorexia being this idea, this fear of food, in a way, the fear of putting on weight when you consume food. So there's a lot of throwing up metaphors in this poem. There's a lot of consumption metaphors in the poem which go wrong. Consumption going wrong, consumption becoming an act of being consumed. So interestingly, consuming food or consuming the Goblin Market becomes an act of self-consumption. You begin to consume yourself or the healthy self that you have in you. So Goblin Market has continued to thrive, and the academic marketplace is a nice pun which is being played away. The academic marketplace being the intellectual industry, the scholastic industry, which then becomes an important site where Goblin Market has continued to rise, continued to have a great brand value, continued to have a large premium value. The poem continues to attract critical interpretations and artistic adaptations as colourful and diverse as Goblin Merchant's wares, challenging Christina Rossetti's surely disingenuous claim that she did not mean anything profound by this fairy tale. Now, in literature we have this interesting idea of intentional fallacy. The intentional fallacy is obviously when you're reading a particular text and you're making the error in terms of drawing too much on the writer's intention, what the writer may have meant, or what the writer may have intended about the poem, which becomes secondary. So if you take a look at Christina Rossetti's own declaration about the poem, where she says quite clearly that she don't mean anything profound in the poem, which obviously gives a lie to the different interpretative openings the poem has offered over the years. So as we just saw, the poem can be read as a poem about moral consumption, Marxist reading about free market economy, the dangers of the free market economy, something which we saw, which we see even in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Then about adulterated food qualities, adulteration in food, about anorexia, about queer studies, about lesbian relationship. So all these different kinds of different kinds of readings are available, are offered by the poem. So that obviously gives a lie to Rossetti's own claim that she did not mean anything profound in the poem. Now, with this very short summary in mind, what is interesting for us today, and we'll begin with the poem in the next class, is to take a look at female agency in the poem. And what do I mean by agency? Agency in this particular course may be defined as the ability itself to articulate a possibility of change. Right, so that's a working definition of agency that we'll go ahead with in this course. The ability of itself to articulate the possibility of change. Now, there may or may not be change. There may be a failed attempt, and maybe an unsuccessful attempt, maybe an incomplete attempt. but the agency becomes the possibility of attempting it, the possibility of creating possibilities, as it were. Now, interestingly, when we see the poem, we find that the market, the Goblin Market, may be read obviously as a metaphor of consumerism, of this the grand narrative of mercantile economy. So the obvious question that comes with that reading, with that sort of description of the market, is that what happens to the female agency, what happens to the female consumption? So how is the female consumed by the market, right? So the whole idea of the female consumer being consumed is something that the poem flags up in foregrounds quite dramatically. So we have, for instance, Laura, who is the fallen woman in the poem, who goes and exchanges, sets up an exchange or establishes an exchange between the commodity and her own sexuality. So she gives a part of her sexuality by symbolically giving a lock of her hair with the hope, with the expectation of getting some commodity out of the market. That becomes the interesting exchange, and that obviously commodifies Laura as well. So the whole idea, the whole aspiration for commodity is then itself commodified, right? So the aspiration gets commodified, and that's one of the things which the marketplace does in this poem. It commodifies affect, it commodifies emotions. Now contrast that to Lizzie's more sensible and more judicious and more pragmatic and more subversive idea of going to the market with the actual penny. Not a metaphorical sexual object, not a metaphorical extension of the self, but the actual penny, which will then enter the exchange mechanism in a very objective way. Now that obviously, the woman with the penny, the woman with money, the woman with agency, the symbolic agency, that completely decimates or unsettles to a great extent the mechanism of the market, because the market in the poem is essentially male, essentially masculinist quality, and that masculinist quality of the poem, that marketplace, is undercut by Lizzie's refusal to consume anything without the penny. Now, the refusal to consume anything without paying for it also becomes the resistance against commodification, right? So you don't get commodified because you are the commodity and the currency are external to you, right? They're not internal to you. You don't consume it. So the act of consuming the commodity consumes you and then turns you into a commodity. With Lizzie, it's different, because Lizzie goes to the marketplace with a clear difference, with a clear externalization between herself, her biological self, and the currency with which she'll purchase a commodity, right? So she holds a penny in her hand, so the penny is outside of her in a way, and it doesn't become part of her body, it doesn't become part of herself. So that idea of externalizing the currency for commodification becomes very, very interesting, and that becomes a protective mechanism against self-commodification, right? So the fact that she doesn't get commodified is because of the penny that she's holding in her hand. So that's something which is interestingly palpable in the poem. Now also interesting is something I may have mentioned already, is how the body of the goblins, they are sort of non-human in quality. So there's a reptilian quality about the goblins. There is a rat-like quality about the goblins. So in the descriptions of the goblins, the physiognomy features are definitely not human. So there is a sense that they come from the outside. They're not really familiar, so they're outsiders. And not just that, they're dangerous outsiders. They're outsiders who can come and consume the purity of the British idyllic landscape. So the violence in the body of the woman can very quickly be read metaphorically as a violence on purity, the violence on cultural purity, violence on cultural hygiene, etc. So the sense of hygiene becomes very, very important in the poem. So hygiene as biological hygiene, hygiene as bodily hygiene, but also hygiene as moral and cultural hygiene. So the Goblin Market comes, and the creation of the Goblin Market undercuts the moral hygiene, the biological hygiene in an idyllic England. So we have Laura falling sick, quite medically, but at the same time it also contaminates the economy. It also contaminates the general idea of exchange in the landscape. Right, so it becomes a very hardcore commodifying economy, which is one of the dangers of an open, liberal marketplace, which is one of the readings in the poem. From a Marxist perspective, a cautionary tale against open capitalism or unregulated capitalism. Now, interestingly, this idea, this fear of unregulated capitalism is something which we see even in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Because if you read Dracula, the novel, very quickly you find out it's not so much about a vampire coming and sucking other people's blood. It's also about a rich other, a rich outsider who comes and buys everything, who's an unprincipled capitalist, an unregulated capitalist, and that needs to be tamed and controlled. Otherwise, he'll just come and buy entirety of England, right? So the whole idea of having a hematological network of biters and suckers, you bite people, and then in the process of make them vampires. That also becomes, in a way, the bite of unregulated capitalism. So Dracula becomes the embodiment, a very male embodiment of the perfect outsider. And of course, there are a lot of readings about Dracula being an anti-Semitic text, how the figure of the Count, the figure of the vampire, has very interesting parallels to the figure of the Jew and the fear of the Jew in 19th century England. So that becomes a very interesting reading as well. We have something similar here as well in terms of the goblins looking like non-humans, looking like definitely not Europeans. And if we contrast that to the ideally pure European white quality of Lizzie and Laura, that contrast becomes quite biological as well as quite cultural in quality. So, this is a short summary, an introduction to the poem, The Goblin Market, and we'll obviously start with the main text. But hopefully this session has given you an idea of the directions we will take while reading the poem, and hopefully, you know by now this is a very, very important poem, and it's one of the most complex poems that one might study in feminist readings or feminist scholarship, because it's a poem about female agency, female emancipation, female resistance, and also female vulnerability, right? The vulnerability of the woman, the vulnerability of the body of the woman with the arrival of a very male market, and how does resistance operate inside the market. So when Lizzie, for instance, enters the market, it's only then that she's able to resist and able to subvert the entire invasion of the marketplace, because the marketplace becomes a place which has this very male objects of seduction, alienation, fascination, othering, etc. And only when Lizzie enters the marketplace can she resist it. So the arrival of the woman inside the marketplace becomes a very symbolic arrival. So you have two women in this particular poem. There's actually three women. There's another woman mentioned who, again, there's a transgressive tale or a tale about transgression, which functions as a cautionary narrative in the poem. But the two sisters in the poem become the primary protagonists. They enter the market. One of them enters the market and then trades the commodity for sexuality, and that commodifies her, that dehumanizes her. So the death-like quality that Laura suffers is an example of dehumanization or reification, or extreme reification, or extreme alienation. And that is redeemed in the end by Lizzie, of course, who enters the market with a proper penny, a literal embodiment of currency exchange, of commodity exchange, which then establishes the order back in the marketplace. So this is the summary of the poem that we will sort of keep in mind in terms of drawing on as we read the poem. And in the next class, we'll start looking at the poem, and we'll start the text, reading it line by line, and then connecting it to some of the broader concerns that we touched upon already today. So I'll see you in the next class. We'll continue with this text. We'll start with the poem per se, read it line by line, and see how it connects to the concerns we discussed today. Thank you for your attention.